Hello, and welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way with God at the center, Judeo Christian values, and real world first hand experience. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review of the podcast. I'm going to plug in the bio if you've heard it, don't want to hear it again, or just don't care. You can skip about 3 minutes and 45 seconds from where it starts. First and foremost, I am a servant of God, preacher, a fisher of men. God is number one in my life, and everything that I do in this podcast is no different, and I don't apologize for that. A little bit about me in the background. I grew up, I guess what you would consider a heathen. Didn't grow up a Christian, but I grew up in the southeastern United States, what most would consider very poor. Hunting and fishing and shooting. Joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. After my combat tours in Iraq, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in law enforcement for several years in LAPD. I worked patrol assignments and more specialized assignments, where by God's grace, He got me through some nasty places in this world of war zones and some of the nastiest streets in the country. Not because I am better, because God chose to have mercy on me and had a purpose for me, and I'm thankful for that. After my time in law enforcement, I was a private contractor for federal government, for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify, doing private contracting work. I'm very much involved in guns and gunfighting. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. I should say my primary MOS is in both branches of the military or infantry, as of one sort or another. Specialized infantry in the Marine Corps and an MOS that no longer exists. I started competition shooting even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I won my first gold medal even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've been blessed by God with the talents He's given me to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. I've won most of my competitions in rifle and pistol, but I've also competed in archery and shotgun and even muzzleloader, knife throwing, hatchet throwing. I've competed in all that. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide. Like I said, I grew up hunting and fishing and shooting. I've done it to put meat on the table because I like to put food on the table with the talents God's given me. I don't apologize for that. I've done it as a professional hunter and guide. I've slain all manner of beast and guided for all manner of beast. Bear and wolf and elk and deer, mule deer, whitetail deer. I've slain ram and fallow deer and countless animals. And I don't apologize for that either. FBI certified, firearms instructor, NRA, and a bunch of other 3-letter government agency certifications. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. I've been blessed to be the commander of a tactical team, an SRT, special response team, in a large metropolitan area, where our primary job was to stop active shooters. But again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, called by God to share the good news, preacher, a fisher of men. With that, we will roll into the day's topic. Alright, men, with that, let's get into today's episode of Gunfighter Life. Recently did an episode on top 3 varmint cartridges, and I thought about it and I was like, well, how was it that I did that one before I did the top deer cartridges? I thought it only fair that I go and do the top deer cartridges, as I believe we are a nation of deer hunters. We hunt a lot of things in this country. You know, we hunt moose, and we hunt bear, and we hunt grouse, and we hunt pheasants and ducks. If you took a random survey of people and said hunting, probably the number one game animal, and I'm just guessing here, that they would think of would be deer. And I think that all over this country, both mule deer, white-tailed deer, black-tailed deer. All across this nation, we are kind of a nation of deer hunters. And most hunters hunt other things too, but I think quintessentially in America, we are deer hunters. So what do I believe are the top deer hunting cartridges? Well, I think that the first one is going to be pretty obvious. I mean, the standard for center fire rifle cartridges in America is the 30-06. It's been around for over 100 years, and when you think of any cartridge and you're comparing it, the obvious thing that you think of is how does it compare to the 30-06? Pretty simple that the 30-06 is a 30 caliber. Not quite developed in 1906, but that's when it officially got its designation. It's a little bit older than that. But 30 caliber developed in 1906. Was used by the military, and obviously a lot of those men were hunters, and a lot of those men came back from war and hunted. Both World War I and World War II, that was our go-to American rifleman cartridge, and I think America prides itself on being a nation of good riflemen, or at least has in the past. And that was an obvious choice. It was a giant leap forward from the things that had come before it. Undoubtedly the 30-40 Krag can hunt deer fine, but not like the 30-06. 45-70 has and still does take deer, but not like the 30-06. The 30-06, like it or not, kind of is a stolen idea from the 7x57 Mauser. You can hate on me for saying that, but it's pretty undisputable that that's true. We took that from the Germans. We took that from the 7x57 Mauser. We even kind of took their design for the Mauser 98 in the 1903 Springfield. That doesn't mean that the 30-06 has not become the quintessential iconic American round. Now, one of the great things about the 30-06 is that it is so popular and so versatile and been around for so long that it really is flexible. Again, I'm going to refer to the Hornady Reloading Manual, not because it's the best or it has the hottest loads, because it's the manual that I have and that I've had for years and years. In my experience, this one's kind of known for playing it safe on the load data. But this is the load data that I'm going to use because it's what's in front of me. Factory loads often are hotter than the loads listed here. But if you think of deer hunting and the 30-06, you generally think of the 150 grain to the 168 grain bullets. Maybe the 180 grains if you're hunting bigger game or in heavier timber. But let's call it 150 to 180 grains. You guys remember the original Batman? Not the original Batman. The Batman with Michael Keaton came out, I think, in the 80s when I was a kid. The scene where he goes, "You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts." I just thought about that. Well, you want to get nerdy about ballistics? Let's get nerdy. The 30-06 Springfield with 150 to 155 grain bullet is pushing max velocities of about 3,000 feet a second. With your 165 to 168 grain bullets, you're looking at around 2,900 feet a second. That's probably your optimal load in the 30-06. Your 180 grains, you're dropping down to 2,700 feet per second. And those velocities are fine. They have plenty of energy for taking any deer in North America at any reasonable range. And they have, for decades and decades and decades, been the standard for deer hunting in America. The 30-06 is quintessentially American and iconic. Let me tell you something. I've never owned a 30-06, I don't believe. And I don't generally have any plans to own a 30-06. But I can't deny that it is the number one quintessential American deer hunting cartridge. It is a great cartridge. So much so that it only took a little bit of refinement when the military was looking for a new cartridge. And this next cartridge is probably one of the big reasons I don't own a 30-06. This is the number 2. I bet you already know what it is. It is one of my favorite all-around cartridges. It is the 308 Winchester. If you look at the 308 Winchester, it's no secret that they were looking at the 30-06. Americans like the 30-06. The military was looking to save weight and have a more efficient cartridge, which I think they achieved with the 308 Winchester. We look at that same Ballistic Geek data. You're looking at a 150 grain bullet, which I think for the 308 is probably the most common. The 150 grain to the 165 grain, you don't see as much of the 180 grain. It really starts to lose ground to the 308 and the 180 grain. But it holds pretty high in the 150 to the 168 grain bullets, which again are the most common for deer hunting in North America. And you're looking at, 2,800 feet a second. And again, this is my Hornady reloading manual. You can get hotter loads. You can make hotter loads. For the 168, you're looking at 2,700 feet a second. Again, plenty powerful enough to take any deer in North America at any reasonable range. And this really isn't an official term, really, but a lot of gun manufacturers use it. It's commonly referred to in American vernacular: long action versus short action. One essential thing that Americans hunt with is bolt action rifles for deer. I mean, lever actions are popular. Semi-autos are becoming more popular. But really, when you think about hunting deer in North America, you generally think of a bolt action rifle. And there's a difference between a long and a short action. Now, you can argue whether one's more accurate than the other or whether one is faster to cycle. I don't know that practically in the field it really makes much difference, but it is an advantage. That's the reason the military went to it. Advantage in weight, it's lighter for the ammo, which really doesn't matter if you're carrying 5 rounds, but if you're carrying 500, it might. Or advantage in the lightness and the length of the action of the rifle. And I don't think anybody would argue that it's not a more efficient cartridge than the 30-06. I didn't say better, I said more efficient. No, I'm not looking this up, but I believe it became a sporting cartridge in America in the 1950s. So even the 308 is not, a spring chicken. But because I think it is a more efficient version of the iconic and classic American 30-06, I think that really helped it. In America, we really love our 30 calibers. And the 308 is one of my personal favorites. And a great thing about it is it's a good crossover tactical, defensive round, tactical round, military police round, as well as a hunting round. And the 30-06 used to be that, but I would argue nobody could argue that it's that anymore, I don't believe. So if you were looking for a do-it-all rifle, you'd be hard-pressed to beat anything other than the 308, in my opinion. The next one, you can't argue with its quintessential American deer hunting cartridge, the 30-30. The 30-30 predates, even by quite a bit, the 30-06. The manual I'm looking at says since 1895. 1895. The 30-30 came out, and it's been killing deer ever since. You could start a bar fight with what's killed more deer in America, the 30-06 or the 30-30. The fact that you would have that argument, you probably have a pretty even split on both sides, tells you that this is a quintessential, iconic American caliber. And I wish it was still more popular. Really, for most hunting, for most people, in most situations, I'm not talking about the new trendy hunting where you put your 20-pound rifle on a tripod and shoot animals from hundreds of yards away. I'm talking about heading into the deer woods with the word of God, a pair of boots, and a rifle. Either spot and stalk hunting or still hunting, or maybe even stand hunting, which is not my favorite, but arguably is probably one of the most common ways to hunt deer in America. Or the quintessential, where it's still legal, drive hunting deer. The 30-30 will get it done. The 30-30 will get it done all the time. If it doesn't, it's probably your fault, not the cartridge's fault. It's a good deer round. I would argue that the vast majority of deer taken under 150 yards. With that, the 30-30 is just fine. And it has energy to kill deer beyond that. It's kind of your point blank range for that. If you guys don't know what point blank means, it doesn't mean, something right in front of you or a person right in front of you or a deer right in front of you. It means the distance that you can zero rifle and point at a given target and hit it without adjusting your dope. Adjusting the settings of your sights, adjusting your holdover. You point at it, you pull the trigger. If you do everything right, as far as keeping the gun steady, that round will kill that thing. And point blank range on a 30-30 is easily 150 yards. And for that, for most hunting, for most people in America, the 30-30 is still fine. And the Winchester 94 and the Marlin Model 336 are just quintessential American lever action deer hunting cartridges, and they're great handy woods carbines. They're great stalking carbines. Kind of the quintessential loads for this, your 150 grain at 2,300 feet a second, and your 170 grain at 2,200 feet a second. Again, plenty to kill any deer in North America. Now, if you'll notice, these are all 30 calibers, and there's a reason for that. I think Americans, gravitate to and have probably because of and since the 30-30 and the 30-06 30 caliber rounds. The next two are not going to be that. They're going to be Wildcats based on two of the ones we already talked about. If you don't know Wildcat and cartridge, where you take an existing cartridge that's established, like a 30-06, and you neck it up, making the neck bigger or smaller to get a different diameter bullet in there. There's other ways to Wildcat, but generally that's the most common, necking something up or necking something down. Well, the 30-06, having been around a while, and people saying, hey, this is great, but bet I can make it better. You guys remember that show, Home Improvement or Tool Time, whichever one was the name of the show, or the show inside the show? Don't really remember. It was always more power, more power. Well, that's kind of quintessentially American too. How can I take this thing and hot rod it or Wildcat it and make it better? Well, the 30-06 was an obvious choice for this. And so, per the manual I'm looking at, in 1925, they did this by necking the 30-06 down to 27 caliber. So now you probably know. The 270. The 270 is quintessentially iconic American, an American wildcatting interpretation, hot rodding of an American cartridge. This quintessential great American thing and make it even, I argue to say better, but more tuned to a Western style of hunting. And the 270 is born. The 270, the 30-06 knocked down to 27 caliber. You can't really mention this without talking about Jack O'Connor, a prolific gun writer in America. He really popularized this cartridge. It's hard to say whether it would have taken off as much without him, but the fact is that it did, and that's American history, a little piece of Americana, and it's been around since 1925, and it's still super popular. Now, I know a lot of people live east of the Mississippi, but a lot of deer hunting goes on west of the Mississippi, and I'd say the 270 is one of, if not the, go-to Western deer hunting cartridge. It has been for a long time. Kind of your classics for this are 130 and 140 grain bullets. You're looking at a 130 grain bullet at 3,100 feet a second, and you're looking at a 140 grain bullet at 3,000 feet a second. Again, for your Western hunting, where east of the Mississippi, unless you own a bean field or get permission to hunt like a long farm field, if you're hunting woods, a long shot is 100 yards. A lot of the eastern states, and then there are exceptions. In the western states, you easily see several hundred yards routinely. And out there, the 270 really does, I think, maybe have an advantage. Deer hunting out west, I'd say it was better than the 30-06. I'd say for that style of hunting, it does give a little bit greater range and a little bit greater reach with a little bit less usually felt recoil, all of the things being equal, and usually not. The 270. If that's a wild, and which it started out, obviously it started out, and then it is adopted, and it's no longer a wildcat. And in fact, in research that I've done, the origins of how and why they settled on the 277 caliber bullet are not really well known, especially not to me. Perhaps it wasn't a wildcat. Perhaps it was developed entirely by Winchester, for Winchester. Usually civilians wildcat these things and make their own dies and stuff first, and then it gets adopted. If the 270 is what I would refer to as a wildcat of the 30-06, next one would be similar in the necking down of the 308. My personal favorite on the list, and the cartridge that I've used to take more deer and elk than any other rifle cartridge. The 243 Winchester. Now, you heard in the bio, if you listen to it, that I have been a professional big game hunter and guide, but it was one of my personal favorites even before then. I was surprised to find that with the professional hunters and guides that I worked with, the number one cartridge that we all carried was a 243. Didn't just guide for deer. Deer was the biggest one. Not just whitetail deer, but fallow deer and Sika deer and axis deer. The number one cartridge you find us guides carrying was a 243. Why is that? Well, because if you're hunting deer-sized game, the 243 will kill any deer in North America. and it will do it with very little recoil, meaning you can chamber it in a nice, handy rifle. For a guide, that's important. Got a lot of other things going on. Even if I'm not a guide, I'd rather, the way that I hunt, I'd rather cover more ground with a lighter, handier rifle. And it's not that I can't handle heavy recoil, it's that I don't want to, and if I don't need to, why would I? The 243 is often lumped in as like a kid's rifle or a woman's rifle. I think that really does it a disservice. It'll kill any deer in North America, and it'll do it with less recoil, with a high, sectional density BC bullet, and a light, handy rifle that I can cover more ground. In fact, I first kind of fell in love with it when I moved to Idaho, and I had a 308, and I had hunted with a 308 successfully. And I saw sitting in Walmart a youth rifle 243 Remington Model 700. I want to say I picked it up for $400, maybe $399 with a scope. And it was light and handy, and I hiked all over the wilderness and woods of Idaho and took, I don't remember how many deer and elk with it, because it was light and handy. And it would kill anything if I put the bullet, a well-constructed bullet, in the right place. And for a deer-sized game, the 243 will do it. And it's got, and a recoil can be subjective, but it's got the least amount of recoil of any of the cartridges we've talked about. It's still plenty for knocking down deer-sized game, and it's got a good, efficient bullet. 243 or 6mm bullets. For launching lighter bullets and other cartridges that we talked about. Generally, for deer, the 75, and even more common, the 90-something to 100-something grain bullets. My personal favorite for this, especially hand loads, is the 85 grain Sierra Game King. Again, I've taken, I don't know how many deer and elk with this cartridge. Generally goes in, dumps all its energy, does a massive amount of tissue damage and fragmenting, and usually doesn't exit the other side of an animal. It usually stops just short on the skin on the other side of the animal, which is, for me, is amazing. I like that. I like that cartridge. I like that performance. I like the 243. Now, with the 243, let's get nerdy. You're launching a 75 grain bullet at 3,400 feet a second. 3,400 feet a second, 75 grain bullet. A lot of people today, I know that the 223, which I don't consider a great deer cartridge, I consider it a marginal deer cartridge, but a lot of people hunt with it and take deer with it. A lot of people think like the 70-something-ish, 70 grain bullets are the quintessential deer hunting round for the 223 I'm talking. If you look at that, for the same manual reloading data, this is a 75 grain bullet at 2,700 feet a second. Again, the 243 75 grain bullet at 3,400 feet a second. And the 100 grain bullets at $3,000. Again, plenty adequate. Whether it's, and I pulled this up on Wikipedia because my manual doesn't list foot-pounds. The 80 grain to the 100 grain, you're just shy of 2,000 foot-pounds of energy. With that, it's become kind of considered the sledgehammer in the 223 bullets, a 77 grain, you're looking at 1,300 foot-pounds. That's not a marginal difference between 1,300 and almost 2,000. With that, that's been my top picks for the quintessential American deer hunting cartridges. If I left out one that you think should be on the list, not your favorite, because your favorite could be a 250 Savage. It's a great round. Is it really, does it supplant any of the ones on the list? If you're like, I can't believe you didn't mention the whatever, way to object respectfully and get everyone to see it, leave a review of the podcast and refer to this episode and say, I think you should have had the 25-06 on there. Can't believe the 300 Winchester Magnum is not on there. Let me know and let everybody else know. As long as it's respectful, leave a review of the podcast. I guess a good transition to that, to the Patreon and the Good Shepherd Training. If you like this podcast, you're not aware, there's also the Alpha Male podcast. We talk about more than just guns, about general manliness, the right way with God at the center. If you care about the important stuff, Simple Man Sermons, the preachings of a simple man called by God to share the good news of Jesus Christ. You can check all those out under the umbrella of GoodShepherdTraining.com. If you don't remember the names, you can obviously probably look them all up on whatever platform you're listening to this on. But GoodShepherdTraining.com if you want to see some more visual stuff on there, if you want to contact me. And these are free to listen to, but they're not free to put out. So you think this is worth $1 a month or more? Fraction of the cost of any box of ammo pretty much nowadays. maybe less than 1 round of ammunition of the calibers we talked about. 1 round of ammo. You could support this message. Again, goodshepherdtraining.com. There's a Patreon link right on there. If you like this message and support the message and think it's worth $1, or any other podcasts for that matter. And you do get some extra content on there. You get some extra tips. For instance, you'll get an insider view of a professional hunter and guide / trapper. My trapping kit is on there that I would use. Some tips that aren't available to the general public or that I put out on there first are available. And you can just contact me on there. You can message me on there. And if it's a question, if everybody that's asked me a question on there has gotten an answer, you can talk to me on there. If you actually care about and value my opinion or respectfully disagree with my opinion, you can converse with me on Patreon. Again, goodshepherdtraining.com. With that, as a thank you for staying tuned through all of that, the tactical tip of the day and the tactical verse of the day. This one may be known throughout the prepper community quite well for food storage, but you might not know it in the hunting and tactical community as much. A good way to store your food and keep it dry. You don't know those moisture absorbing things a lot of times. Just iron oxide. They're just causing rust, which takes moisture out of the air. You can spend a bunch of money on those kind of things, or you can just use hand warmers. Hand warmers are kind of like a giant version of that. They take moisture out of a given environment, especially if it's a closed environment. If you're storing your ammo, especially with ammo the way it is now, you might just be able to go to Walmart like we used to do, way back in the 3 or 4 years ago, and just buy a box of ammo on your way to set in your rifle. You have to find it ahead of time on the internet and store it. So if you're storing ammo in ammo cans, or any kind of watertight, airtight thing, take one of those hand warmers. They're super cheap. Come in packs of 2 for $1 or something around there. And that might be an old price with today's inflation, who knows. But they're inexpensive, especially compared to the cost of ammo. So take one of them, shake it up, and throw it in your ammo can and seal it. Helps keep your ammo dry. And hopefully last longer, especially in everything going on today and the craziness. Hopefully that, if you didn't know, is a good tactical tip of the day. Tactical verse of the day. If you didn't listen to Simple Man sermons, one of the ones we talked about, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourself, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, casting all your cares upon him, because he cares for you. Be sober and vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Thanks for listening. Have a blessed day.